This is the biggest story. Like every day, it's just Fozzie, All Blacks, what's going, like huge numbers. Just the nation was gripped by it.
I remember Sam coming up to me after the test. In fact, I got a photo of my phone and Sam and Ardie and Sammy Whitelock talking in the corridors. And Sam's main concern was, you're not going to resign. And I said to Sam, I can't, I promise you I won't resign. And I said, I can't resign after what I've just seen you guys do. And they said, well, so surely you're safe now. And I said, look, I don't know. I've got no control over that. Today, do not know what exactly was said in that room. And I've never asked them. That's their business. You know, as an All Black head coach, you've got to make some horrible decisions. But the one that sticks in my mind has been the hardest I've ever done was getting Dane Coles down to tell him that he wasn't going to be in the 23 and for the final. And I remember tearing up and crying. And I could hardly even say it. And Colesy basically helped me through it.
Long term, back in international rugby, happy with club rugby? Hey team, this week we talked to Ian Foster.
Ian is one of the most respected and recognised coaches in New Zealand. He was All Blacks assistant coach for 8 years from 2012 and then was the All Blacks head coach for 4 years ending in 2023. In this episode, we cover his whole life and career. He's got a new book out, Leading Under Pressure, and we cover all the best detail from it. The first half of this episode is about his upbringing and life and what made him who he is. And the second half, we really get into the detail of everything that happened in that 4-year cycle. There's so much goodness in this. Ian came to talk, and this was one of our best episodes. This episode is brought to you by the TAB. Got a hunch? Download the new app today and get your bet on.
Enjoy.
Ian Foster, welcome to Between Two Beers.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're very excited to have you in studio. You probably don't know this, but this is the second time we've met. Do you remember the first?
Oh, shouldn't start an interview with a lie, so I'm going to say no.
Yeah, that's okay, and that's okay.
Yeah. So we did some red carpet stuff on the Halbergs last year, and we asked you whether you could kick the ball further than Wayne Smith. So it's a highlight of our career, but obviously not as memorable for you.
We didn't do a great job because I think we had you right in the beaming sun at Spark Arena.
Must have been the year before. I think.
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
correct in your facts.
Yeah, sorry. And smart. You pushed it back. You pushed it back.
Well, 2 years is enough for a memory loss for me. So
yeah.
And you very generously suggested that Smithy could punt it further than modern day Ian Foster, which was nice. And I think you might have said that Kieran Reid beats Richie McCaw in a 40 metre dash, but I might have my facts round the wrong way on that one.
Well, I was feeling pretty brave then, taking on those three icons, wasn't I? But yeah, you can't. Look, Smithy was always going to win everything when it came to rugby, so for goodness sake.
Yeah.
But, anyway.
Well, welcome back to Hamilton. You might not have heard of our movement Ambassadors, where we
saw the hat over there.
Yeah, Hamilton,
so we're bringing the pride.
ambassadors.
We're bringing the pride into Hamilton.
Yes.
So you'd be an ambassador? Proud of?
Well, if I knew what it was, I would be.
Okay.
It's,
well, here's one. You must have seen it over the years. Hamilton tends to get a bad rap from people that don't live here. So, I mean, we're about changing that conversation to it's actually a really cool place to live. It's a cool place to call home. Are you technically inside the bounds of Hamilton City?
Well, we're close enough.
Yeah,
close enough. Yeah. But it's we've been here a long time. Went to university here and worked in the media here and lived in the St Andrews area for about 17 years when the kids were all grown up. So
ambassador.
I've moved a little bit on the outside, and
that's okay. Hamilton's it's expanding.
Actually got a Kiddo Rower Award 2 years ago, which was pretty special too. So
that's definitely ambassador.
I think I could put my hand up.
You're one of our greatest.
I just don't want to tell too many people. You know, we don't want too many Aucklanders coming down.
No, and that's the one. That's the one that
I've got issues with that motorway because it's brought a lot more people down here. You see.
Yeah, but it must have been helpful going the other way.
Very useful.
Yeah, very useful.
It's all right. Secret safe with us.
It's much quicker to poke and o bacon for those bacon and egg toasted sandwiches.
You're going back to your pre-game with the Mulu men there, aren't you?
Yeah.
Oh no, that was the ice creams. That was the ice creams.
Yeah.
So present day, based in Japan. The way we sort of operate, we've got lots of little sources that feed us information about interesting things to talk about. One of the stories we'd heard is that you're over there with Shag, right? But before your wives
Steve
came
Hansen
over,
for the uninitiated.
Steve.
Before your wives came over, it was just you and him, and you had to sort of decorate your houses or your apartments or whatever. And so it was you and Steve going down to IKEA and doing some furniture shopping together. Is that an accurate picture?
Yeah, it is. Disappointed you knew that. We've actually got a great photo on my phone of him and I with a basket full of ironing boards and it was like going back to flatting days going to Japan. And Steve was there, and Steve was very useful, except he I wouldn't say he's the budgeter in his family. I think Tash does that. So Steve was pretty keen to chuck whatever looked the most expensive into a basket and call it mine. So
was that the TV that you?
Yeah. Well, you've done some good research, because I was going to have a TV bigger than the house, and I said, mate, we've got to settle down a little bit. So I pulled back a little bit, but then it sits in our house and it's quite big.
There's no bigger test of a relationship, any relationship, than trying to build a piece of furniture together. Did you have the flat pack instructions and screwdrivers, or
no? We'd probably struggle in that area, Steve and I, putting together an IKEA thing like this. We'd both probably prefer to be the instructor rather than the instructee, and so no, we stayed away from that. But we do have issues about who sits in the right seat in front of the TV, even though it's my house.
It's an interesting OE, isn't it? It's kind of a throwback. You spent so much time in professional rugby, and now you're a couple of lads over in Japan just living their best lives.
Yeah. Well, it may appear like that, but it's it's been a great experience. It's I went there. I had a chance to had a look at a number of different options after the World Cup, and decided that I really didn't want to coach against any team wearing black, and for a while, and so I went to a club scene and had a chance to, I guess, go out and do my own thing in a club. But the Tide is a big club. It probably hasn't achieved what it needs to achieve, and it's pretty ambitious. And the chance to work again with Steve was, we enjoyed each other's company. We like any coaches, we great with each other sometimes, but he's a top man. I've learned a lot from him, and loving the experience. So we're having a good time, but it's hard work.
So what does your year look like now? So you're back now, obviously, and you're heading back in August. Is it sort of 3 months in New Zealand and the rest in Japan? And back to summer?
Yeah, sort of a winter baby now for the next 3 years. We go from Japan winter to New Zealand winter. So we sort of here for 3 months. The Japanese pre-season starts, I guess, in August, but most of the players come in September, and then you have quite a long build-up for a competition that starts mid-December. But so we're back for 3 months, got a bit happening here, but go back and then come back home for the odd week here and there based around buys. But it's a great setup. I'm really enjoying it. It's a chance I wanted to do something a little bit different, and a chance for an old dog to learn a few new tricks when it comes to language and how you coach, and having some fun with it.
I've heard you've almost tried to do something new every day or something new every week, whether it's try new food or go to new places. Is that something that's in the Japanese experience for you?
Well, it's the Ian Foster version of a Japanese experience. So I was over there for 3 weeks by myself without Lee didn't come over for the first part in the pre-season, and so I was there and decided, well, heck, I've got to do something. So apart from trying to learn 55 new names in a language I didn't really speak very well, I just decided the only way to really get comfortable was to go out and become uncomfortable every day. So I always look for a new experience. So, be it going to a different cafe, talking to different people, or going a different route, driving a different way, going motor, the whole lot of different things. But I just try to do one a day, and it actually does help build my confidence that I could live over there. So, but a really enjoyable place to live.
So are you actively waking up thinking, what is the difficult thing I'm going to do today? Or is it more just you see an opportunity to do something which is a bit uncomfortable and you lean into it?
Yeah, no, I was actually looking for a new experience, because I think sometimes when you go into a new environment and if it's that foreign, it's easy to sort of the foreignness of it to actually sort of intimidate you, and you just end up sort of sticking to your own little area. But for both Lee and I, we decided, well, at our stage of life, we don't want to be thinking about New Zealand while we're in Japan. We wanted to love Japan, and so the only way we can do that is by sort of stretching ourselves as people and getting out and doing some things that we wouldn't normally do. So it's It's been great. I've enjoyed that. I've become an expert on ramen and a whole lot of different things. And
there's a lot of different layers of ramen. We've caught my attention here.
There are.
There's a rabbit hole.
People just thought there's just ramen, but there's all sorts, isn't there?
That's right. And in fact, I've actually started a ramen society with with my translator and a couple of the other coaches on a Friday night. Everywhere we go. Every time we play away from home, we go and find a different ramen that's typical of that area.
Yep.
And so I've learned I don't like the Yokohama ramen, for example, and it's very pork broth fatty type thing. But
sounds like it's a bit of me, that one.
Yeah, well, each to their own.
Yeah, totally.
Each to their own. And but I'm very much into the tantamen, which is the sort of the spicy type ramen. So enjoy that.
Yeah, good things.
Love the food.
Did you ever think you'd be on Between Two Beers podcast talking about ramen?
Chatting ramen.
No, but it is a highlight. And I kind of thought the more I can talk about ramen, the less you can maybe tell a few stories that you may or may not have gathered on the way. So,
we get in there. Part of the reason you're back, well, I'm not sure it's the reason you're back, but you are promoting your book. Your new book is out, Leading Under Pressure. To look and see the name. I read it last week and it is great. Like, I cannot express how much I enjoyed the read. Captivating, engaging, like it told your story. For background, I was in the media. I was at the Herald when all this was happening. So, I was on the other side of what you talk about in the book, but it's so good to hear your version, which we're going to get into. But part of what you sort of talk about at the start is that you're a very private person. Like there's no sort of real existence of Ian Foster on social media or anything like that. So I kind of want to talk about the motivation for why you actually wanted to write a book.
Yeah, good question. And if you see my name on social media, it's not me. I think I am there somewhere, but it's not me. There's a great looking photo of me too, and that's not me. But it's I don't know that I'm a private person. I just feel that when I was in the role that I was in, I feel you get a lot of positional power when you're the All Black coach or assistant coach or whatever. And for me, the role was, I've always been about, it's just about the team. And it's what's best for the team first. And I kind of came from the era, I guess, that I didn't feel that me telling everyone what I had for breakfast every day was more about promoting me rather than promoting a team that I play for. So so I'm not anti it, and I'm not sort of negative about social media. I just didn't feel it was the best thing for the team to have coaches go out and do all that. So that was just my own personal view. So why did I write a book? I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of regretting it now. I'm sitting here sweating under a lot of pressure from you two. But look, I think I never thought, and this will sound funny, but I never thought my life was that interesting that I'd ever write a book. And but I got put in some positions in life for whatever reason that I loved what I did. I loved my 12 years with the All Blacks. And then when I went into the head coach role, it was a 4-year period that was really tumultuous in many ways, but it was like a roller coaster, but it was so exciting as well. And went through some great experiences with people. And probably coming home from the World Cup, I gave myself a chance just to pause, and I was probably a little bit overwhelmed by the support of the country when we got back. And I think that the country knew that our team had been on a bit of a journey. I think, the fact, I think we owned up to the fact we didn't perform in sometimes in that period as well as what we should have. But I think they saw a team that tried to fight their way through a whole lot of things and ultimately nearly got the big prize, and it's and it was kind of, I went from worrying about the state of our country and the way they support to being quite proud of the way the country supported the team at the end. And I knew the journey, not just me, but a lot of my management team and a lot of the players had gone through. And the more that I got feedback from people, I found people were actually legitimately interested in the journey of the way that team went. And so decided to write a book. And when you're faced with someone, with a chance of maybe someone writing the book about your era versus writing a book where you're actually able to contribute your own internal thoughts. I thought, well, I'd rather go that way and tell the picture the way I saw it. So
we're recording this a week before the book is released. How are you feeling about people reading it? Like, do you care about the response?
No, not really. That's a harsh way to say it. And I do care, because I'd like to think that people will read it and say, okay, well, we can understand a little bit more about what the team went through. And that would be the number one thing for me. And, when I wrote it, had a chance to, I remember sitting down with the publishers and talking about how we're going to publicise the book and all that sort of stuff. But that they were really, and Gregor, who obviously wrote all the intelligent parts anyway. And, I was really clear that this was a book that had to tell the story the way that I saw it. And it wasn't about selling volume. It was just about telling the story. And so what I love the fact is that along with the publishers, we're not going to do a massive degree of marketing around it. It's just, here's the book. I want to explain it, and then people can judge it and do whatever they want.
I think you just do one podcast and nothing else.
That's right.
I reckon.
Yeah. One Hamilton-based podcast, and that's it.
Well, for some bizarre reason, I asked someone who I trust their view on, and we had a number of options, and you guys came out at number one. And so I thought you'd be pretty proud of your parents for telling me.
Well, speaking, as is our way, speaking of parents, we spoke to your daughter, Michaela, in the lead up to this, and she suggested, and didn't give us any context around it at all, but just suggested, Dad's got a good story about nailing his first book sale even before the book has come out. Now, she's not even read the book, but can you tell us about this first book sale that's seemed to be completed?
First of all, she is my problem child, really, because apparently in the book I only physically name one of my three kids, and so I haven't mentioned Mark and Jamie by name. So Mark and Jamie, I'm catching up with you now.
I mean that consternation did come through in the notes, but I left in my conversation, I left that off. I'm glad you've walked through that door, so you've owned it.
Now, last week we went over to Whangamata. My mum and dad have they retired over there. It's always been our beach, and Dad's passed away. Mum still lives there. They're a great community. I've always tried to support some of the activities they do over there. The rugby club had a 200th club game for Brad Lawrenson. Was playing his 200th game last weekend, and so they had a big function, and they wanted me to come and speak at it and raise money. So I promised I'd bring something along with speaking, and so got there, and an hour before I realised I hadn't bought anything, hadn't found an old jersey or something. So I went down to my mum's room, and I'd lent her a copy of the book early for her to have a look at it. So I took that, and halfway through my speech, because they introduced me and said that I'd done some great things for the community and bringing some great things to raise funds. And so halfway through my speech, I said, look, I've got a confession to make, is that I forgot to bring anything. So what I have bought is the worst possible auctionable thing that I could possibly bring to Whangamata, and so I put it as my book. And so I said, so it's a secret, but I stole it from my mum, so you can't tell her. and I said, so here's the condition: if you buy it, you can't get it till June the 18th. And so there's a guy over there, Peter Gilbert, who'd done all the organisation. Peter's going to hold on to the book until the 18th, so you can't pick it up till the 18th. And I said, I'll sign it and all that, so it'll be the first book that I sign. But and I said it's going to cost $39.95 on the Wednesday the 18th, and on probably Saturday the 21st it'll be $5 in the warehouse bin. So think about that when you bid. And I said that, and as penance, I'll match the bid. And so they started bidding for it, and at about $300, I stood up and grabbed the mic and said, look, it's not worth that amount of money. You should not be paying that amount of money for my book. And at $500, I grabbed the mic again and said, hey, you forward, stop bidding, because it hasn't got pictures, so you won't understand it. And anyway, it passed in at $1,500. So
Good little fundraiser.
So yeah, I chipped in $1,500, and the first book sold for $3,000. So
Wow.
the Whangamata Rugby Club has done very well out of me. But great cause and a lot of fun and laughter of the night.
It is a collector's item.
Yes.
When I was chatting with you just before we started recording, you mentioned that one of the really important parts of the book was the players' voices, and I'm going to bring in some of them in the sort of second half of the episode. But you also said that you only read what they wrote when you read the book for the first time. What was that experience like, reading their words?
Yeah, well, look, as a coach, you prepare a team as best you can, but ultimately when they go out and play, you leave it all up to them. And through my time in the All Blacks, I've been privileged to be involved with some pretty special athletes, and on the field they were special, but off the field they were special. And so when it came to writing the book, it says leading under pressure, my story. Well, it's my read of how that worked, but the real story is that it was about us. And through the whole COVID period and travelling overseas for 14 weeks with not coming home, all the pressure of dealing with a lost series against Ireland, all those little things, the coach always is in the headlines, but it's always a group that gets impacted. And my style is about working with them. And so to me, I wouldn't have done a book if they weren't prepared to actually contribute to it. Because I think, and so the deal was, I'm happy to do it, but I want some other voices in it. And so when I asked a few players to do it, they were really gracious and said yes. And I said the deal is that I don't want to know I don't want to know what you asked. I don't want to know what you say, because it really had nothing to do with me, because I wanted their view of the situation. Yeah. And it was also a couple in their management team, the same boat. And so I didn't. So it was only when I saw the initial draft that I saw all their comments, and and I love it because it just makes the stories my story, but they're connected into it, and that's where it should be.
Yeah, it's really strong and really powerful, and like I said, it validates your story. So we'll get to that soon. I want to sort of move us back to the start and sort of understand, the influences that sort of shaped you. Your dad sounds like he has an interesting story. A barber who became a minister, and then that kind of influenced your early days. Can you tell us about your dad?
Yep. So it's always mum and dad. I think it's very hard to talk about one without the other, and they were, he was born in Cambridge. They met. They did operatic society together and sung Fiddler on the Roof and all that sort of stuff, which fortunately I was too young to actually have to go to that point. But we had a great two brothers, Greg and Peter. I was the youngest, born in Bataruru. Dad was a barber there. Mum was a mum, and also she also was a hairdresser too. So we always gravitated towards mum cutting our hair rather than dad. So, dad's barber shop was right next to my grandfather's butcher's shop, and so there's probably some of his barbatry work was very similar to the butcher stuff, I think. But no, he just had a great personality, great way with people. And when I was 4, I think it was, he decided to go into the ministry, become a Presbyterian minister. He struggled at school and had to leave school when he was 15 and went working, and so they didn't want him. They didn't think he could deal with that role, so they asked him to go to university for a year. So he travelled up through every day and went up to Waikato University and had to pass a couple of courses, which was a massive highlight for him. And so then he traced us all down to Dunedin. So sort of had 8 years, 3 years in Dunedin, 5 years in Mosgiel while he trained, and then we sort of followed him around to, in those days, the ministers used to move churches, so from Mosgiel to Tokoroa, and that's how we eventually got back to Tokoroa. So, but special, family was everything, and being a minister's son you're exposed to a whole lot of different things, and but certainly I think mum and dad's steadfast and their faith was a big impact on us kids, and it's something that I still hold true to now. And But, he had a great way with people. He was funny. He would go and he'd be quite happy to go and have a beer in a pub with people and chat to people. He just was a good community sort of person, great connector. And so, big influence.
Do you see similar traits in yourself that your father carried through that time as well?
Oh, look, I'd love to say yes. I kind of, but it's kind of hard to see those things in yourself, isn't it? But I know I certainly see them in my brothers, and so probably a little bit there somewhere.
What's your relationship with religion growing up and now?
Yep. Well, I certainly call myself a Christian, and so my faith's a big part of who I am, and we used to have a lot of debates with people in the rugby environment, and I kind of, to me, how I describe it is I wouldn't call myself a religious person, I'd call myself a Christian, because I think Christianity is more about a relationship with someone rather than a set of rules or a code. So it's, but no, it's still a big part of my life.
Does it influence your coaching directly in any way, your faith?
Yep. Oh, I think it influences everything. It's coaching is how you project yourself, isn't it? So I guess my own core values and how I go about things would come out, manifest itself out in how I act and behave, and it's and I'm sure that I probably haven't lived up to some of the values that I believe in at times, and pressure would have caused some of those things to go, instead of being black and white, to be quite grey. But no, my faith is still a big part of who I am and how I coach. But I think it's often, if you ask me how I define coaching, I define coaching as you're serving your team. And I know you've got to lead, but we've got to try and influence our team. And so part of me, what I love about coaching, and the privileged part, is to actually figure out, okay, how do I actually get the best out of you? How can I help you to actually encourage you to thrive? So that's what you're always trying to do as a coach. And if an organisation wants a coach to come in and actually change and tell people what to do, then I'm not the bloke. And so my style is more about trying to understand people and trying to work alongside them.
Before we move into Ian Foster, the coach, we want to spend a little bit of time on Ian Foster, the player. And I want Shay to come in on this, actually.
You've killed me here. I told you not to.
Because when we were meeting for this earlier time, I was like, do you remember Fozzie as a player? And you had an explanation, which I want you to retell.
Oh, that's unfair. Here's the thing.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. So I watched a lot at the old rugby park on what is now the green zone on the bank there.
Yep.
Now I probably came in at a time where you were sort of transitioning out of your career.
I was old, yeah.
Yeah. And Jacko, Glenn Jackson, was coming through, and I was saying to Steve, I was like, look, my memory is a little bit of like Foster would start, play quite technical, and then maybe at half time, Glenn Jackson would come on, and all of a sudden there'd be chip and chase and running rugby, and I was sort of thinking, why are we persevering with Ian Foster? With like 93 Ranfurly Shield Challenge is done and dusted. Long way of saying, my question is, you played 148 times for Waikato, and people kind of only focus on 93, going up State Highway 1 and winning the Ranfurly Shield. It's an illustrious career.
He's watered that down a little bit, Fozzie, by the way.
Oh, stop it. 140, like the 147 other games must be full of great memories and good times.
Well, the sad thing is the answer to that is no. Like I probably had one good game. And no, that's
we were both go. Do we?
No. It's hilarious because every time I get introduced, if people talk about my playing days, it's always about because I scored a try.
The try, at Eden Park.
So I was the only try scorer in that game, and everyone remembers that because that was an iconic game, and it was iconic probably mainly because of Auckland, wasn't it? Because Auckland were a great team, and we were the team to sort of bowl that Shield era. So, and so, even though you blushed a little bit, you're probably 100% right. I was just, I love my playing days. I love the fact that I had 11 years as an amateur, 3 years as a professional. And so I was in that transition from one to the other. And when it went professional, I think I was part of the world's oldest backline with the Chiefs, with myself and Walter Little and Frank Bunce. So we used to chuckle about that. And it's fair to say that, my style didn't exactly set the backline alight in that latter part. But I learned a lot. And sometimes it's actually really useful to be a coach if you're not massively talented as a player, because you've got to find a way as a player. And so for me, it was always about the strategy and how to play. And I didn't have the physical prowess that some of the players in those last couple of years with, Glenn was there, and he was a great player. And he was there for my last 2 years with Waikato, and I was captain at Waikato at that time. And then we won the Shield again in 97. And so in 98, where clearly, I used to get rolled out in a wheelchair and then they'd take it away. But basically, I played the Shield games that year. We held the Shield for a year, so I think the coaches thought they needed my leadership in that for the Shield game. But there was one other game, I think, that I must have been starting to annoy the coaches at that point, because I think I got subbed off after 10 minutes.
I think I remember that. Yeah. I have a vivid recollection
I remember
of an early hook.
I remember seeing you in the green stand with my number up to sub off. So it's
But it was a team to be a bit nostalgic for a little bit. Like Mooloo parades down Victoria Street after winning the Shield and winning Division. Like there was great times as a young kid watching that team roll out. Like it must have been fun being in the middle of it as well.
Yeah, it was fun, and it's look, there's some great memories, and because we were a team when I started. My first game was in '85, and then through that late '80s, we were sort of second division, came up to first division, and then we had Duncan Dysart coaching. He was quite innovative from down from Tokoroa, but then sort of Glenn Ross came in and really gave Waikato a real structure into those early 90s. And then Kevin Green and Farrell Tamata took over and sort of released a little bit of the rigidness of our game. And actually, we started to win and did really, really well. So there was 6 years, I think, was really cool for playing for Waikato. We achieved some good things. And then when John Bowe took over, a lot of the older guys left there, and there was 3 old farts left. There was Steve Gordon, Matthew Cooper, and myself, and so we were there for, I guess, leadership and to help pass on the baton. But my favourite Waikato is probably that 97, 98 time, because, you had your Bruce Rehanas and Roger, a lot of these other guys started to come through. A lot of the younger guys were really sort of starting to play well. Reece Duggan was there, and we used to argue all the time at 9. But it was a cool team, and winning the Shield in '97 and then holding it. And I always loved the fact that I won the Shield 3 times, I lost it twice, and retiring with the Shield in the bank was a pretty special memory. But of course, what it meant is that when I retired, they kind of wanted me to stay involved. So that's actually holding the Shield for the year was probably the reason I got into coaching.
Can you just give me one more nostalgic moment? But were you playing when Buck Anderson was walking up and down against?
Was I what?
Against counties.
1997.
Was it 97 against counties, saying you can get your tickets for the final at the final whistle, and then was it Joelle?
Yeah,
Joelle Venderi and Jonah.
Well, it's annoying you say that, because years later, coaching the All Blacks, we had 2 loose forwards called Kieran Reid and Jerome Kaino, who ironically were in the counties under-21 team who played the curtain raiser and were on the grandstand. And they had great pleasure every so often of trying to find a way to discuss the 1997 semi-final, which is the one game, I think, as a player that I never, ever, ever went and watched again, because we were up by about 25 points.
It was a lot.
And Buck said what he said, but I don't think we can blame Buck. But I think what we can blame is we have ongoing feuds with myself and Matthew Cooper, because he was 12. And in the last 25 minutes, counties finally realised that maybe there was a gap between 10 and 12. And Joelle Vaderi and Jonah decided to wake up and go through that hole. And so I've always claimed that was Coops'. He should have stepped in and tackled, and he said I should have pushed on the outside. But they discovered a weakness and found it pretty well.
Sorry to bring that up. It just popped in because Buck was my PE teacher at Boys High at the time.
I'm leaving now, mate. If the rest of the interview's like this.
And then on Monday I was like, what have you done? What have you done to us?
No, it was demoralising because, anyway, those things happen.
So before I detoured, you just got into coaching, and I understand why I remember it was as an assistant coach or working with the backs for Waikato?
Yep. So basically working, Kiwi Sarank took over. He went from assistant coach to head coach, and so because you described me quite well before, where I was sort of more like a bit of a coach as a player anyway the last couple of years, and Jacko was all set to go, and so I stayed on and cut my teeth as a coach, and I did it for 3 years. I was still working. I had my own. At that stage, I'd been working for TVNZ in sales and marketing. Then I went and did my own sort of management consultancy, advertising consultancy business. So I was doing that and coaching just on the side. And after 3 years of doing that, I decided I liked it, and applied for the head job when Kiwi left, and bravely got offered a 1-year contract, and if I didn't make the semis, I was going to get sacked. So I was part of that new era of players who played a little bit of professional, went straight into coaching, and it's fair to say the clubs and the traditional pathway didn't really like that flow, so it wasn't necessarily a popular decision at the start.
It seems like quite an obvious evolution of the player, like strategic and tactical and consistent, and then you move into coaching, and then that's what you carry on. And I'm interested, I sort of want to draw you up to when you became the All Blacks assistant coach in 2012, but before that you were the Chiefs, 2004 to 2011. How different were you as a coach when you started in 2004 to when you were in 2011? Like, were you a lot better?
Well, I hope so. You certainly grow a lot, and you have to. If you think about every industry that people are in, if you don't get better, you get chucked out, don't you? So I had 8 years with the Chiefs, and in those days, in those 8 years, we had to pick from our region. And so the Chiefs team was basically for sort of Waikato counties, Bay of Plenty, and for a couple of years at the start, obviously we had a North Harbour, Northland there, but that was before me. But we had to pick from that region, so it was a very different team. And we were sort of, probably along with the Highlanders, a bit more of the battlers in terms of the 5 teams because of that. But I loved it, and it was a great time. In those days, you coached as a head coach. I was basically doing the attack and a lot of the defence, and and I got Dwayne Monkley in to come and help me do some tackle stuff because I knew nothing about it. But it's but you actually did a lot of stuff in there, and again, it was a really formative time for me as a coach, like having to coach a broad range of areas, having to deal with the draft system in those days and all that. It was a great learning curve. I was young, but I again, the one thing I did is just surround myself with good people and people that were better than me. I picked a couple of guys that had coached me, like Glenn Ross came in as a manager and Farrell Tamata came in as my assistant coach. I had an old guy called Brian Clark, who's an icon of Waikato rugby, passed away last year, but he was like a mentor for me in terms of keeping me true to the values of the game, and had a great time. So it was a great preparation for me. And from an attack coach perspective, which is ultimately where I went to with the All Blacks, it was awesome because we kind of never had a big, powerful forward pack. We were always sort of working our way, had to struggle away through things a little bit, but we always had a bit of I often describe it as a V-dub pack and a Ferrari backline. And so the focus of that group was attack. And so when we got it right, it was pretty good.
Mm. So 2011, you leave the Chiefs. 2012, you become assistant coach with the All Blacks. What was your relationship with Steve Hansen at this point? Talk us about how you got into the assistant coach role.
We made a final in, I think it was 2009. We had it was a classic semi-final at the stadium against the Hurricanes, and I couldn't see the last 3 minutes because it was all down in one corner near our goal line, and the fog came in, so I actually couldn't even see it. But made a final, got smacked over there in South Africa. But after that, I had one more year to go on my contract here, but I had quite a significant opportunity in UK with a big club up there, and so I planned to go up and visit them. And Steve Chu found out about that, so we were at a meeting down in Wellington, just doing a Super Rugby review, and I got summoned into a room by Steve Henson, and
have you got a shag accent in your impression?
Yeah, it'll come out.
Okay, all right, sorry.
Yeah,
don't force these things.
Yeah.
It'll come out.
Yeah, and it's like his opening gambit's always, well, what's happening, son? Because he always just wants to know. And but he told me I didn't need to go up north, and I said, well, I'm going to have a look. And he said, well, if I am coaching the All Blacks next, then I'd love you to work with me. Now, I didn't really have a relationship with him as such, just a sort of a head coach of Super Rugby and so that surprised me. I said, well, that's awesome, but I'm still going. Have a look. And so I went and had a look and came back, and it was pretty clear I was going to leave. And then over the next couple of weeks, there was a few more conversations domestically, and so ultimately I decided to stay. So the Chiefs signed me, New Zealand signed me to the end of 2011 with the Chiefs. And to me, I'd sort of feel like I'd run my course a little bit with the Chiefs, but I stayed for that extra year. But there was no guarantees. Like the next year, I don't even think we spoke to Steve about anything about the All Blacks. And it was only 2011, finished with Super Rugby. We didn't have a great season. In 2011, so I sat there for 3 or 4 months while the World Cup was on and played a bit of golf and thought, okay, well, let's see what unfolds. And then even after that, Steve still had to go through a process, and there was no guarantees that I was going to get anything. So, but ultimately, I trusted his word from a couple of years earlier, and that's where we went.
And you're not a guy that gets nervous, apart from this interview. But
the only time.
2012, first coaching session with the All Blacks assistant coach was a sleepless night?
Yeah, no doubt about that. I make reference to that, but it's I still remember it, because you're sort of you're not bulletproof as a coach, but it was all exciting. And, January, February, March, April, May, you're getting all ready with your plans and all that sort of stuff, and had some meetings with players and get your game plan all sorted, and being the attack coach and the back coach. But then there was that sleepless night before the first training session, and I keep thinking, man, tomorrow I've got to coach Dan Carter and Ma Nonu and Conrad Smith and teach them something. Now, how do I do that? And so, you certainly go through those periods of, wow, when you start thinking about the people. And so I loved the experience. I was really fortunate, some great players who knew the game through and through, but they also knew that they actually wanted to be coached. So you had to find little ways to help them. So
just getting into the weeds a little bit, but when you were staring down the barrel of that challenge, are you trying to think of some real left field idea that I'll introduce them and like revolutionise, or are you stick to your knitting and just try to make incremental gains? Or what does that even look like?
Well, it just challenges you on your whole ethos of the game, and so you start to realise, well, what is important in the game. And so I just had 2 or 3 key principles in attack that I really wanted to dwell on. And so, because effectively you can coach structure, and coaching structure is one thing. And so every coach has their pet structures that they want to play in attack. But for me, the real gold is in the skill delivery of that structure. And so for me, the key areas to spend time on was actually more the skill execution within the structures that we played. And through 2012, it was a pretty special era, those 4 years leading into 2015. And, I don't think we played the cleverest rugby. I don't think we changed. We didn't change often some of our attacking structures, but we certainly challenged a group to be become masters of the skill execution part of the game. So I enjoyed that, and the players bought into it, and they saw it. And because my whole theory really is if you teach players how to catch the ball properly, pass the ball properly, run good running lines, then after that, the decisions they make are often, they're already good at that. And so, to go to someone like Conrad Smith and say, I'm going to help you make a decision-making and attack, well, goodness sake, he was streets ahead of me in that area. But to maybe help him and make sure his preparation in terms of his running lines and his catch pass, it gave him that opportunity to make the right decision. That's kind of where we went. So it's a great way to avoid players thinking, I didn't have any magic bullets. It's just, okay, but I can help you get better.
Yeah, the golden generation, right? The team won 93 of 108 tests, only had 10 losses. Did you realise how special it was when you were in it?
No, not really. I think I think at the end of 2015 it was special. Like winning that first ever World Cup away from home was amazing. And the irony of it is that everyone's kind of expected it, but the All Blacks had been in that position a lot of World Cups before and not delivered. But I think after that you kind of look back on it and thought, well, this is pretty cool. And because when you're in it, you realise how close you are to not having that record. You go to 2013 and the first unbeaten year for the All Blacks or for anyone in international rugby. But that last game against Ireland, you remember Aaron Cruden kicking a goal. Ryan Crotty scored in the 4 minutes into extra time, right. and Aaron Cruden's missing the first kick, but they charged it early. And you keep thinking, okay, well, if the ref hadn't been brave enough to make the right decision there, and Crudes hadn't missed that second kick, we wouldn't have got those records. So the fine lines. But looking back, really proud of that period.
So 2019, Steve steps aside after the World Cup, and you hadn't been sort of like marketing yourself for it, but you were one of the incumbent, the most likely to take over the role. And I'm interested in digging in the book. You talk about radically traditional, and you speak about kind of like your, proposal for the role was that research that leading orgs that are successful over a long period of time don't go through massive step shift changes. So there was Razor that was kind of like from the public or the media as this big change agent, and then you were more radically traditional. Can you tell us what that means?
Sounds good, doesn't it?
It does. Well, I asked Stephen to explain it to me this morning, and he couldn't. He couldn't. I said, well, let's let the expert explain it then.
Yeah, well, I borrowed it because it was someone else's research from an overseas university. But it's, I think at the end of 2017, we had the Lions tour, which was a bit of a flat experience, really, that draw. And actually, I didn't enjoy the series. It seemed quite a cynical series to me. But anyway, New Zealand, Steve had signed to the next World Cup, and they were keen for me to sign. And I spent a lot of time thinking about it because I knew that if I signed to 2019, that was going to mean that I was going to be the guy that would carry through if continuity was still the right concept, And so I ummed and ahed up for quite a few months before I signed that contract because I just had to make my own mind up. And in fact, I wasn't overly that excited at end of 2017. I remember it's the only time I've ever grown a beard. Looked like you two fellas. Actually.
Did you?
Yeah, so I grew a beard on that end of year tour.
Wow. There must be some good
full coverage.
Yeah. No, it was terrible.
Yeah. Let's delve into that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm not so much into manscaping like you two. I obviously spent a lot of time.
It was scraggly.
No, it wasn't pretty. And
I can't imagine that. I
was just going through the turmoil. So I wonder what you're in the turmoil.
Wow, it's been a long time. Yeah. It's 15 years or so.
We don't need to go into that in this one, Posy.
But I sort of, by signing, actually meant, in my own mind, I was saying, okay, if we are still in a strong position into 2019, and if the foundations are still really working, then that sort of, in my mind, committed me to be the person to go through. And to put my name in the hat, I should say. So after the World Cup, we obviously didn't win the World Cup, but we, in our mind as a group, we kind of felt we're still in a really strong position. And so I put my name in the hat. And to represent a group that I felt was still doing a really, really good job. And so that's kind of the reason that I did it. And so the more I thought about, obviously the marketplace, we're going to see this as continuity versus revolution. And whereas I kind of didn't see myself as just being a continuity thinker, like I had my own way of doing things, and Steve was immensely successful with driving that, and I was a big part of that. So I was involved in the decisions he made too. But when you got it by yourself, it forces you to rethink, okay, what will I do differently? And so the radically traditional model was one that I read about, and it actually encapsulated a lot of what I believed with the All Blacks, which is the key is you got to understand that the traditional part is the core part of your organisation, all the things all the rituals, all the routines, processes that you do that have helped you become successful. And what I learned by reading through this thought process is that the successful organisations are the ones that don't go and break that up unnecessarily. What they do is they evaluate it all the time, and the wisdom is not by changing all your core foundation, but it's of learning which parts of it you need to tinker with. And so that's how I presented myself. And so internally there were some significant changes, and like my leadership style is very different to Steve's, and that's a significant change all by itself. And so that's how I presented it, because I didn't think that I was never going to do the same thing that what we'd done. But I believe that my knowledge of the foundation of and the processes about how the All Blacks work put me into a great position to start making a few little tweaks and changes.
So that's the professional side of it, looking at that continuity. But behind closed doors, are you having conversations with your family as well? Because it's one thing to be the All Blacks assistant coach. It's another thing, as you said in your words, to be the person in the headlines or to be the name in the story. So what did those conversations look like? Because from Michaela's perspective, it seemed as though there was a little bit of not divided opinion, but there was differing opinions within the household as well.
Yep. The answer is yes. I think it's I think your family's always got an opinion on, when you're in a high profile job, and like we just came back from Japan, we hadn't won, and we had a great quarterfinal again, and then lost to England, and so that was frustrating. And Steve finished. Everyone knew he was finishing, so he went. So suddenly, for the next month, I'm sort of dealing with the aftermath of not winning a World Cup, but then also trying to figure out, well, how do I position myself to go again? And so you go through a whole lot of periods of different thought processes, and there's times that the families have enough of it, and I think for my wife is she's massively supportive of, and she's good. If I ever if things get tough, and I'll often share them with her about some frustration, and she's awesome at listening, but she's also awesome at saying, oh, well, you wanted the job, so just get on with it, So she understands the pressure. For your kids, it's tough, I reckon. I think it's tough on your kids and tough on your parents, ironically. And so I had to ban my mum from reading the papers because she was taking it a bit personally. And we had some good conversations with the kids, but I learned something, and it was in 2009 actually, and I was coaching the Chiefs. And remember those days we had 3 Sunday papers, and the market was headline after headline because of the 3 Sunday papers always wanted a headline. So one of the key journalists at one of the papers phoned me up after 3 rounds of the Super Rugby, and Chiefs, we lost our first 3 rounds. And they said, I'm just letting you know that all the editors have come together and they've just been waiting for the first 2 or 3 rounds, and then just to see which coach is going to get targeted, and you've lost the first 3, so everyone's coming for you. And so I got called I think after our 3rd round, I got called a bumbling idiot by Steve Holloway in the New York.
That's good.
Yeah,
it's really
I wonder
good.
if you'd read that. Wasn't my headline.
I'm pretty sure I got called a bumbling idiot. And then we went on and won 8 out of 9 games and made the final for the first time in our history. And then I got called a super coach by the same media or something. And
Can't have been Steve.
no, it wasn't Steve.
me.
But it's but I remember sitting down with my kids at the time and I said, I just want to share that the same organisation has called me a bumbling idiot and a super coach, and the only difference is 3 months. And so the truth is that neither's true. Is that the truth's always somewhere in between, but society likes to polarise you at one extreme, don't they? And we love putting people at extremes and putting people in categories and away they go. And I said, but the real message is that whatever other people say doesn't matter. The only thing that really matters is you and how you see yourself. And so that's how we've tried to deal with the All Black role with my family. It's just we sit down and have conversations. The girls have been great. Jamie and Michaela have been really good at, I think, dealing with it. Mark's probably been tough. You know, went to Hamilton Boys High and I was coaching the Chiefs, so he got ragged every time that we lost. And you know, I love him to bits, and he's always been my greatest supporter, but he probably feels it the most. But you just got to keep talking to them and let them know that, hey, it's okay, we've got this. And it's not about dismissing public or the media's views. It's just about saying it's not real, it's just a view. And I'm still your dad.
So you're in the All Blacks hot seat, and the first bit of friction you write about in the book involves Gilbert Enoka. And the Amazon All or Nothing documentary had they'd been filming it with you or with Steve, and there'd been this kind of emphasis from New Zealand Rugby on more commercialisation of the All Blacks. And Gilbert had sort of been leading the resistance for you guys, saying it wasn't in the players' best interest and it wouldn't sort of be good for winning culture and all this sort of stuff. And then when you came in, they tried to get rid of him, right? But and I think this is an example of loyalty. I'm not sure how you would frame it, but you saw that wasn't the right decision to make. You stuck by your guy and it caused a bit of friction with New Zealand Rugby.
Yeah, I think so. I think I think when you look at the commercialism of the game, it's happening, it's there, it's real, and it'll never go away. And so I wasn't naive enough to know that that's not a big part of the role. But I felt that that under before 2019 is that. We were grappling with it a little bit, between Steve and myself and Gilbert, Darren Shannon. We were always sort of working with New Zealand about how to get the right balance. And then there were decisions being made. And the key is commercialism is not bad, but it's making sure you do it side by side with high performance. Because ultimately, when push comes to the shove, the All Blacks go and play a game. And if the test doesn't go the right way, it's the team and the coaches and all that we're the ones that hung out to dry a little bit, because we get judged on our performance, and that's the way it should always be. So we're always trying to make sure that the balance between what we're expected to do and deliver doesn't compromise the high performance side. And so that's a natural area of friction, and it will always be there. And so what was happening wasn't new, but I just felt that Gilbert has an amazing role in this All Black team over a long, long time, and he's helped coaches. He's helped right back from Smithy's days, and he's been an awesome resource for the team. And so he's more than just a mental skills person. He does a whole lot with players underneath that, and I knew how important he was for us going forward. I knew that he was going to be. We were going to have some new coaches in that were going to need, help, and I needed help to make sure that the way we set our culture up was the right way. And so I fought hard from him, even though he'd been used a little bit as the weapon to try to blunt the impact of the commercial side of it. But I had to move him as well, so he had to understand that we had to go down this commercial path a little bit. But he was awesome, and so yeah, it did take a little bit of working, but you got to stand up for what you believe, and there's no point getting a big job and finding yourself leading the number one team in the country and hopefully the number one team in the world, but looking over your shoulder and realise that no one else is following you. And so for me, I had to fight for the group that I believe was going to be right. So, set the tone nice and early.
There's lots to get into now across this 4 years, and I've kind of picked a few different chapters that I think will be good to dig into.
Oh, I bet you have.
And the first one, and it took me back, when you read about COVID times, you kind of forget.
Yeah.
And it's the period when you were in Australia and, there's quarantine and you're away from families and you can't leave your rooms and all this sort of stuff. And you had a squad of 40 over there with you, and you made the decision to sort of spread the playing time around the group because they're making this big sacrifice. You thought it would be bad for team sort of culture and morale if some were playing and some weren't. But the way you went about it, and I've heard this from the book, but from so many people about your one-on-ones, your real strength. And you made the decision on Monday nights to everyone would get a text if they weren't in the team, and then you'd have 25 1v1s on a Monday night back to back to sit down and talk to them about why they weren't in there and sort of hear them out. So that was 2.5 hours of basically delivering bad news to players. Can you tell us about that period?
Yeah, well, then I'd go and have therapy on Gilbert's couch afterwards.
Yeah.
And George Duncan, our masseuse, he'd often be in there having a red wine with Bert, and they would counsel me after that. But it felt very natural to me because I think if you look at that was 2021, and look, if you think back at everything everyone had to go through, forget about rugby in 2020, massive time. And life was different. And so suddenly people were like playing for the All Blacks was special for the All Blacks, but also our whole view had been coming, we had to look after our families first, it was a lot of family orientation thinking in those times because, COVID was scary there for a while and everything. So when we went on the tour, it was like a week before we went on that tour. I think we played Aussie in a Bledisloe Cup game in Auckland, and then suddenly the Australians shut the borders into Australia. So we only had 6 days to go, and then once we went, we knew we couldn't come back because of the New Zealand's quarantine rules. And so the government wouldn't change those rules. So we knew that if we went in August, that we couldn't get back to the end of year tour, which was in November. Then you still had to do another 2 weeks quarantining. And for some of the players, that was tough. Well, for everyone, it was tough. So we had to spend a week sort of not negotiating with players, but some players had to go away and think about, is this the right thing for us to do? You had other players who were expecting babies in that period. So we went away on a tour with, I think we had 5 captains that year, if I remember rightly. I think Sammy Whitelock couldn't come because of a baby. I think Sam Cane was the same. Aaron Smith was the same. Richie Mwanga was the same. So it wasn't, we left behind a lot of key players in that for that Australian part. Some of them joined us in the end of year tour, and we had to take heaps of players because we couldn't chop and change. We couldn't send players back if they got injured. And so players had to hop on the planes knowing if they got injured in the first game, then they were stuck with us for the next 3.5 months, even though they knew they couldn't play. So everyone had to agree to the criteria. So once we went, first game was in Perth, had 2 weeks there. We weren't allowed out of the hotels. And, we had mini putt competitions in the team room. The guys were creating a lot of fun, but it was tough work. And so we had to build an environment, and like one story, we're all on the same floor, and after a while, some Uber Eats packages were starting to build up outside some of the boys' rooms. We had to do our own laundry and put it in bags and put it in a pile. So I started to, being a little bit mischievous, started to put a couple of piles of my laundry in front of, I think it was Geordie Barrett's door, who was across the corridor. So when he came out, he tripped over the laundry bags, and so after a while, the next couple of days, I started to get things piled outside my door, you see. And so Uber Eat bags and laundry and old towels. And so I got up in front of one team meeting and I asked for a confession about who had been doing this. And no one confessed. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to find out. And so they were laughing at me, big joke. But lo and behold, I actually got our security guy, Logan, who was outstanding, to put a secret camera in the hallway. And so the next day I went out of my room and there was a table like this one out blocking my exit, and there's all these bags of laundry on the top of it. So I had to crawl underneath to get to the lift. And so at the defence meeting, it was a Thursday, but again, a Thursday meeting before a test match, and they were starting to talk about defence, and I got up and said, righty-ho, who's been putting that stuff in front of my door? And so, again, everyone starts to giggle, and I said, this is your last chance. And, no one's confessed. So I walked to the back of the room, turned the lights out, and Jamie Hamilton, our analyst, started to play the video cameras. And there was... and what really brought the house down was when Ardie Savea came along with a bag of his old laundry and whacked it outside my door, because Ardie was outstanding, and Asafa more. And then was Rico Awani was a bit of a... He was scared because he actually was really nervous about doing it. But I joke about that, but we had a lot of fun on that group because you had to create a different environment. And the players deserved really hard to get away from the pressure of the environment when you're stuck together for 14 weeks. And, when you think about it, players not playing, the players want to play. And if they weren't playing, if you're in a normal test match, they're able to go away and switch off a little bit and get out and talk to mates and get over it, then get into it. And so our expectation is that they get over it and get stuck into work, which they all did. But we just I felt particularly is that everyone just deserved everyone needed clear information. And so the way we dealt with COVID was to, whatever was going on, we'd bring the team with us. We'd write it up on a board. Here's our issues. Here's what we need to deal with. And so I felt that the players earned that. And so it was just a matter of having some honest conversation. Some players didn't want it, didn't feel that. Some players would text back and say, oh, okay, I'm cool. I'm clear. But it was just making sure that it wasn't a hierarchical environment that they'd go away. I didn't want players feeling like, I wonder what's happening. I wonder when I'm going to get a chance. And so it just changed the things.
Was that a hard part of the job though? Like 25, like that's got to be quite draining on you.
Yeah, look, it's always the hardest part of coaching. Selection is probably 80% of coaching anyway, so getting that right. But the hardest part is telling players. And so you've got a choice, haven't you? Because if you think about it, you can just say you're not playing, you're playing, or you could sit down and explain it. The trouble with sitting down and explaining it properly is that you may not get agreement. And so, but it just felt it was important that players had a chance to vent a little bit and say, okay, well, I know you're frustrated, but here's why I'm making the decisions, and here's how it works. And, it wasn't always rosy. In fact, some of those, I used to, you'd sit in your room and I'd actually dread making the first text, because I knew once I made the first text, then I had to go. And I'd kind of look for a reason to put it off. If I wandered down to the team room, players would kind of just move away,
Red Sea
or here's files, check your phones, it became a bit of a thing, they all knew. But it just became, if I go back to serving the team, I think it became a key part of that.
Is it something that you continued on?
Yeah.
Post-COVID era? Did you always continue with that Monday night, I'm going to go through and Zoom and do all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, and look, that's right, I have. And it's just something that I felt was right. And I always felt it was the head coach's role to do that. Going on, it's an awesome feeling when you finish. When I finished them all, didn't feel elated, just felt like I'd done that. That was my job. But it also involves some of the hardest things I've ever done as a coach. And I think I described it after the final in 23, or in the 2023 final against South Africa when we were in France. I had to do it, and obviously the bigger the game, some of the bigger the emotion, and the one that sticks in my mind has been the hardest I've ever done was getting Dane Coles down to tell him that he wasn't going to be in the 23 and for the final, and probably in my mind, one of the greatest All Blacks. He was massive for us, and I remember tearing up and crying, and I could hardly even say it. And Coles, he basically helped me through it. He just said, "Foz, it's okay. I understand. I'll just do my job." And that's the measure of him. But there's a lot of emotion.
There's probably a misconstrued perception that there isn't emotion attached to some of those decisions, that it's business and it's a black and white, but it's people and personalities and their livelihood as well, right?
Absolutely. And particularly when you think about World Cups and you think about players' families will spend a life savings to come over and watch little Johnny play in a World Cup, and with the expectations they might see him play, and then suddenly he's not playing. So the player is not only a massive desire to play on the park for the team, but they've also got people around them that they want to keep happy as well. So it involves a whole lot of things, but it sounds complicated, but if you think about it, at the heart of it's pretty simple. The players just should expect transparency and some honesty, and they won't always get the answers they want, and you don't always agree. But at least say, okay, well, I've said what I needed to say.
I want to link us up to the Irish series. So that 2021 Bledisloe Cup, you beat Aussie 3 times, you win the Rugby Championship, you lose to South Africa, and then that Northern Tour, the last 2 games, you lose to France.
We beat South Africa too.
You beat South Africa too. You did.
You beat them.
You beat them and you lost them.
Yeah.
That's
just being clear with words.
Yeah. Very important after
a lot of wins.
Bumbling coach.
So you lose to France, you lose to Ireland in the last 2 games, and that leads into the Irish series in 2022. And this is when it really all starts to kick off. Great result in the first test, 42-19. Lose the second, 23-12 in Dunedin, and then 32-22 in Wellington. I want to take us to the last game in Wellington, because there was the press conference thing, right, where Joe Malcolm sort of didn't tell you that the press conference had been cancelled, and that made it look like you were sort of shirking your duties, which you very clearly weren't. But it sort of started a snowball, I guess, of then Robbo fronts the media, and he has some comments about it being results were unacceptable, which was like an us versus them statement. And it kind of, the snowball starts building from there. Can you take us to that last game against Ireland and what happened in the aftermath?
Yep. I'll give you my view of it. Whether I knew everything, I don't know. But it's not that basically after a series, I did all my normal media stuff after the game. So that night I did a full media thing, and so as far as I was concerned, I was doing what I needed to do. And the next morning, as a head coach, you don't always do media the next morning. So I didn't have expectations that there was media the next morning for me. And but I knew behind the scenes that New Zealand were trying to figure out how to do it and all that sort of stuff. So whoever organised the media conference, it wasn't us. And so when I still remember going downstairs, and I knew that the knives are out and the topic was really hot and all that sort of stuff, and I knew there was pressure on people to say something on that. But I remember going downstairs at the Intercontinental in Wellington and going to order coffee, and there was cameras outside and filming me. And then when I went out on the bus, they said, "Oh, why didn't you turn up at the media conference?" And well, I didn't actually have one. So there was a little bit of surprise from my perspective, and I felt really disappointed because I kind of, in hindsight, I wish I'd actually got on the front foot and just done another media conference and owned it myself. But because there wasn't one scheduled, I didn't expect there to be one. I didn't really think about that. But in hindsight, I would have done that differently. But at the end there, so I never made a decision to cancel a media conference. And Jo Malcolm she's outstanding at what she does in terms of the media liaison and love it a bit. And she made the decision when I think she got faced with media about whether we should do something. She decided not to, and I think she made the right call personally. But
so she was doing it from a place of wanting to protect you.
Well, if you talk to her, I think that would be her answer. Yep. And in hindsight, we had a good lengthy conversation about it and said, well, in hindsight, I would have rather done it. But you're not always right as an All Black head coach, and you've got people around you that are really good at what they do, and sometimes you just got to trust them, and I did. And in hindsight, her and I, we agreed that we would have done that differently. But then to lose the series was enough. It was a big story, wasn't it? My job's on the line, and yet I guess what was a little bit disappointing the next day or so was, I wasn't excited with some words that came out of New Zealand Rugby after that, because it did create a bit of a them versus us, and
pretty unacceptable, isn't it?
Yeah, well, there's that one word I didn't think that was the right word to use for an organisation, and secondly, it surprised me how much the media dwelled on the fact that I hadn't gone to a media conference, because surely that was the lesser of two evils. Surely I should have been judged more on the performance. And, and so I was intrigued with that. But it was a deep, dark couple of days, and clearly there was going to be some change, and New Zealand Rugby were in the mood for change. And I think I described that we hopped on a bus, went to Wellington, and then some of our flights got delayed. So I ended up sitting in Wellington Airport, not the most popular person in the country, and some headlines banning around in media while I was sitting there and waiting for my flight. So it was an interesting
You
time.
described it as the never felt so alone in all your life in the book.
Yeah, okay, is that how I describe it? Yeah, okay, well, that's probably about right too. Mm-hmm. It's it was definitely a lonely place. Like there's no doubt, losing that series hurt. Walking down the Wellington Stadium from the coach's box down to the field, I smile and chuckle about it now, but wow, it was I heard some things that night pointed at me walking down through the crowd that didn't kind of make me that proud to be a Kiwi. But
there was a throat slitting gesture too. Was that was the test before?
Yeah,
was it?
No, that was that test
was that
there.
Test.
It's funny how little things sort of stick in your mind, and I mentioned that in the book simply because when people get disappointed and they don't kind of get the thing that they want, and I reckon our country went through that a little bit through COVID, is that everyone kind of felt like they had the right to get angry at anyone else who was annoying them. And clearly I was annoying a few people, and there was a lady, an older lady sitting in front of the box who, after I think the first or second try, got up and looked at me and slit her throat. And I kind of thought, I get the passion, but really, do you want to get that personal about how you're feeling? And so I was disappointed with some of that, but clearly I disappointed a few people too at that point, because they wanted us to win all the time. But a tense time.
When you are in that situation and you're in public, how do people operate around you? Can you sense that people are either like, oh, here comes one, he's gonna, they're gonna come after me here, or this one's gonna be okay, or like, do you have to avoid eye? Like, what is that even like? How do you operate that situation?
You just got to run with it, really. It's I understand people feel they have the right to express their views, and they have, but it's when you're in the heat of battle and emotions are high that, clearly, and I'll include myself in this, is that we all probably act in ways that sometimes we'd regret and maybe do differently in the calm of day. But look, people are fired up, and it's not everyone. But this was us losing to Ireland. We'd been in isolation for a long time. We hadn't had a big test series for a long time, and suddenly we lost. And for me, it wasn't a great surprise, because I didn't feel like we were we had 2 years where we'd shut the borders. Our Super Rugby competition was Super Rugby Aotearoa. It was just us, and that was out of necessity, so I've got no issues with that. But we tried to tell our public, in order to brand it and to sell it, we told it was the best competition in the world. And if a player played well, or they're one of the best players in the world, and I'd hear Super Rugby coaches talking about their players up, or best in the world the way he's playing, but we were playing ourselves. And yet when you put on a black jersey, you were playing teams and countries that they'd carried on through COVID, and we'd fallen behind as a country. And the Irish series showed that. And they weren't number one in the world by accident. They were a good team and they were better than us. And so we had to make some changes after that. And a lot of people thought the change should have been me. And you just got to live with that.
So the question after the Irish series was he going to get fired? And you were probably as much in the dark as anyone after reading the book. But it was the continuation of this breakdown in your relationship with New Zealand Rugby. You write about Mark Robinson and Chris Lendrum coming to your house for a chat, them asking what changes you're going to make. And you're saying, well, I didn't know if I was going to be one of the changes, so I wasn't going to do anything until you'd communicated it to me. And I actually want to bring in Beauden Barrett's voice here, because this is the start of some of the senior All Blacks that, like we spoke about at the start, really sort of add some depth to the book. He writes, when we lost back-to-back games at home to Ireland, Fozzie was the easiest one to have a crack at. It was about now that rumours were circulating amongst the players that the New Zealand Rugby was considering change. We knew that as players we could help support Fozzie by playing well, but we didn't do that in this series. The only other way we could show our support was by telling him and backing him up in the media space, by saying we believe in him and his team. That was all we could do at the time, because I think the public sensed change was coming and it was just a matter of when. The public was demanding that, as well as our bosses. I'm not sure if I've ever felt a bigger disconnect between the organisation and the All Blacks. Like, man, that's a statement. Can you tell us about the relationship at the time and what was happening?
Well, the relationship was, they have a job to do. And we have a job to do, and it's times that we hadn't performed to the levels we wanted to perform during that Irish series. So we have to own that as a team, and I've got to own that as a coach. So I put myself in a vulnerable position because of that. But then it's then it's up to the organisation to decide how they're going to do it. Whereas, and for me, I felt they created a them and us type thing rather than an us thing. So it wasn't a matter of, and the use of the words after the Irish series meant that everyone knew something was going to happen, and you can't use the words unacceptable and then say that you're still great mates. So they took it was almost like an HR process to it, and I could see that, and so clearly I wasn't going to get sacked straight away, but the next couple of games, which just happened to be away tests in South Africa, we're going to define that. But in the meantime, my angle was, and I remember it was 3 or 4 days, it was before we were assembling to get ready to go to South Africa, and I didn't really know where I was going to get on the plane, but I was at home. I don't think I was great company for my wife and my family, and getting all sorts of calls coming here, there, and everywhere, but I didn't really know what was going on. So for me, whilst NZR sort of decided to figured out how they were going to do a review, because they said they were going to do a 3 or 4 day review with players, and I thought, well, for me personally, I'll go straight to them and ask them. So I just basically made some calls to Sam Cane and a couple of leaders and said, righty-ho, I need you guys to meet, have a chat, and tomorrow morning tell me what I need to hear. And I said, if the noise is too much for this team, then I'll go. And so you just need to tell me where you think we are at as a group. And so, because we were all disappointed. And so the next morning, sat down with Sam Cane. He told me what the verdict was, that we needed to make a few changes in the group. We needed to sort a few things out in the game. So, I had a horrible decision to make a couple of changes to assistant coaches who are great men, but it just wasn't clearly, the connection wasn't as strong as it needed to be with the team. And so I kind of took control of that and made those calls myself. And so it was an interesting time period. It certainly wasn't, there's a lot happening there that you probably wouldn't follow a normal process with, but it is what it is. And so, but my verdict was, I was always about, what did the team think? I was more interested in their views rather than NZR views, and they had to do what they had to do. And ultimately we put together a crew that jumped on a plane and went to South Africa, and I seem to remember I had to stand up in front of a media thing at the Auckland airport, and so that was an intriguing media conference. But I really believed in the group, and I kind of felt like, oh wow, this hurts, and I know everyone's after me, but as long as the group were willing to roll their sleeves up and work together, I felt, well, I'm sticking at it, and so that's how that went.
You referenced earlier in the conversation that the sleepless night before the first session training Dan Carter and Ma'anonu. What was the night like after you'd called Sam Cane and said, give me the feedback in the morning about whether you essentially want me to continue in the job or not?
Pretty good. It wasn't it was a tough time, the whole thing, but tough on the players too. And because remember, they'd lost a test match as well, and they were hurting. And I still remember thinking, okay, but I trusted them. And for me, you don't want to coach a team if you haven't got the shit. And because then it's everything's too hard then. And so for me, it was all about, okay, if I've got the shed and they believe in what we're doing and they want to fight for it, because we're not going to get back up the mountain unless everyone wants to roll their sleeves up and fight together. So we had to do that. And so that was okay. And I also clearly remember a phone call out of the blue from Ardie, and remember walking down the hallway and go, mate. And we didn't have a lot of phone calls, Ardie and I, and he said, how you going? And I said, good. He said, nah, how are you going? And I said, oh, not great. This is tough. And he just told me that he loved me, and he said, oh, you're our coach. So just get on with it, And so those sort of things are powerful and make you want to fight for it. And so I did.
Those conversations with John Plumtree and Brad Moore, like you say, men you respect, you love, you rate them as coaches, that they had to go for the reasons. Does that sit in the pit of your stomach, those calls? Do you act as soon as you know, do you do it straight away, or how did that look?
Oh, they sit in the pit of your stomach, all right, still do, because good men worked hard, went through the whole 2020, 2021 period, which was a tough time to coach. They had to go through the same experiences that we all did. So horrible part of the job. But ultimately you've got to make what you believe are the right decisions for the team. And I felt and the team needed some change. The debate was, well, should I have been the change? And am I saving myself by throwing assistants under the bus? And you're never going to change people's minds on that. But ultimately, for me, it was around talking to the players and thinking, oh, what do we need to go forward? Because it's all about this team being the best, and that's what we were driving. So had to make those calls, hated them, and still hate them.
You do get on the plane, and the South Africa series is a doozy. Lose the first test 10-26, but played really well. Played really well. And I want to read what you say in the book to sort of frame the second test. You say, No one outside the team was ever going to buy into the narrative that we had any chance to win the second test to be played a week later at Ellis Park, Johannesburg. And when you consider the facts, the media and the public were right to have written us off. This was a powerful Springboks team playing at their spiritual home. We had lost 5 of our last 6 tests and just axed 2 assistant coaches. We'd scored only 1 try in a Mombella, and that came in the 77th minute, and after the box had been reduced to 14 men, which suggested our attack wasn't flowing as we needed to. Nothing had changed in the sense that my task was the same it has always been, to prepare the team for this big game as well as I could. I certainly wasn't thinking, how do I save my job? So believe it or not, it really was business as usual. And my only goal that week was to get a performance out of the team that we could all be proud of. What happened beyond that was out of my control. So in the background of this, New Zealand Rugby had been talking to Razor. You knew Joe Schmidt had been approached about joining him. You say you couldn't have felt any more like a dead man walking. And you have this game. You don't know, even if you win, you don't know it's going to be enough. What's that like? What's that? Yeah, take us there.
Yeah, look, it was the whole 2 weeks was surreal in many ways, but and someone in my management team actually reminded me recently, because I kind of forgot about this, but they said that one thing we loved about the Johannesburg week was is that I had a management meeting on the Sunday, and I got the whole group in there, and basically, because everyone was, because remember, this is just not my job. This is about 20 odd people working for the All Blacks, and so they've got careers too, and their careers often hinge on who the head coach is, and I remember saying to them, I got reminded, but now I do remember, I said, look, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to have a job after this test, win or lose. But I said, I really don't know. But I said, but there's one thing that I do know is that we're currently coaching the All Blacks, and this is the best job in the world. And so whatever happens tomorrow will happen tomorrow. But this week, let's just really enjoy this week. And so our focus was on just wanted our group to enjoy a test week, and yes, there was massive pressure. Like a couple from NZRU, including the CEO, turned up, spent a week with us that whole week, which they never had before. So you knew the pressure was on and everything was going on. And to be fair, when I went back to my room each day and shut the door, I was probably a slightly different Ian Foster than what I was when I was out, because I'm not immune to the feeling of pressure and how that goes. But I knew the only way you're going to win a test match is if you actually really enjoy your week, and that's how we tried to work that test week. And so lots were happening, but the flip side of it, with all the pressure going on and all the media and everyone was painting the picture. Clearly, I think the media had been sort of briefed that things were going to happen, so a lot more people came on that trip than normal, because when there's blood in the water, the sharks do look around, and that's normal. But for us, I really tried to lead from a perspective, I just want to enjoy this week. And ironically, I still remember walking up to the box at Ellis Park before that test, and I sat there, and again, I just got excited like a little kid watching the All Blacks, and that's kind of how I always wanted to feel as a coach. And I did that day.
And you win.
And we won.
35-23. After the final whistle, you write about being alone, having a little period alone in the dressing room, and Aaron Smith comes and sits next to you, and the emotion just all pours out.
Yeah, look, after a test, I generally go back to the shed because I put my iPad down in my box. See, I do use an iPad rather than a piece of paper and pen now, and so I did that, and I was the only one in the shed, and then I'd normally go down onto the field, but it was then that it hit me, really. I kind of thought, and I don't know whether it hit me that's it, or I wasn't sitting there feeling that's it or there, but I do remember sitting thinking, like, all the pressure of the week sort of came out for me, and I just sat there, and And I teared up a little bit, and it's the second time I've said that on that podcast, so I sound like I cry a lot. But
that's all right.
But I certainly teared up a little bit, and it's like the pressure just came out. And I remember thinking, oh well, if that's it, the heck of a way to go, and that's kind of how I felt. And I remember Aaron coming in, and he didn't say a word. We just sat down there, and I looked across after a few minutes, and he had a few tears, and he just turned at me and said, "You know why we did that? It was for you." And I thought, oh, right. So that didn't help my emotional state.
I want to bring Aaron's words in too to sort of expand. He said, "The hardest thing for me as a player who's been coached by Fozzie for so long was seeing how much he was carrying, but he remained so stoic and so positive. All the messaging coming from outside the team was that this would be his last campaign. It was well publicised. We all knew the writing was on the wall. But Foz said he was going to focus on nothing other than delivering this week and next, and what will be, will be. Every time he fronted us in the team meetings in South Africa, you wouldn't have known. It was crazy. I was thinking, how is he so strong and so mentally tough to be so focused on just 3 games?" And the other part is, so Sam Cane and the leadership group are all behind you now. So you win the game, they all go and see Robbo and basically say you can't do what you're thinking of doing. Like, the team is behind them. Fozzie has the greatest chance of us doing well at the World Cup next year. That's just got to fill you with so much strength.
Yep, definitely. Like, it's because it's one of those times that everyone knows. Like Sam was amazing, like Sam and Ardie and Bodie and all those guys. But I remember Sam coming up to me after the test. In fact, I got a photo of my phone and Sam and Ardie and Sammy Whitelock talking in the corridors. It's quite an intriguing thing. But their concern, from what I gather, was that I was going to resign after that test. And I don't know what they'd been told before that game and all that sort of stuff. And so Sam's main concern was, you're not going to resign, are you? And I said to Sam, I can't. I promise you I won't resign. And I said, I can't resign after what I've just seen you guys do. And I never intended to resign, by the way. But that was obviously their fear. And they said, well, surely you're safe now. And I said, look, I don't know. I've got no control over that. And I said, so he said, well, what could you do? I said, well, I don't know. I said, that's not really, I just want you to enjoy the test match. But he wanted to drive some messaging. So what happened after that was nothing to do with me. And I actually deliberately stepped out of that space. And the fact that they wanted to have a yak with the NZR after that game, that was their call, their choice. I still today do not know what exactly was said in that room, and I've never asked them. That's their business.
And you're in the media at this stage.
Oh, was that you?
Yeah.
And are you on the presser?
So no, but like this, for the listeners, like, this is the biggest story. Like, every day it's just Fozzie, All Blacks, what's going, like, huge numbers. Just the nation was gripped by it. But New Zealand Rugby made the decision to plan a press conference the next morning. This was like the day before, right? Like, Robbo was going to front the press. And then after this, obviously, things change. And it's like, well, shit, we didn't think this was going to happen. And then they weren't sure what they were going to do. But he still fronts the press conference and he says nothing. And it's kind of like, what the hell? Because from the media side, it's like, what the hell was that? Why are you holding a press conference to say nothing? There was nothing of substance said. And it was a very confusing time. But now it's starting to make a little bit more sense. That must have been unusual for you. Are you watching that live? Or are you just hearing about it afterwards?
That particular one, I heard it about midnight the night before the test. And so Matt Manakia, our media guy, texted me, and he was concerned because he found out they were planning a media conference on the Sunday. And I said, okay, come and see me. So it was midnight and I was on my bed. So he sat on my bed. And I said, now, before we have this conversation, there's one thing I want to share with you is never, ever text the All Black head coach on the night before a test. And we had a few chuckles about it, but he was he didn't think it was a good idea. He discussed it with them, and they still wanted to do it. So I said, well, Matt, it was a matter of you got to put it in context that the All Black group we were trying to focus on a performance, and my belief is that we were really trying to focus on what we could control, and other things that were happening around us, we kind of just had to, even if we didn't like them, we just had to. It's their job. They'll do what they need to do, and that's their role. And ultimately, people get judged on their actions about how they go about it. I didn't think it was a smart idea. Ironically, I ended up doing a media conference after that, an hour or so after that, simply because there was that expectation that I should, based on the Irish thing. And so, but again, I didn't have much to say either. Are you going to be coaching against the Argentinians? Don't know. And so I got a bit of flack for, I think, an on-field interview with Goldie or Mar. Do you think you're going to be coaching against Argentina? Don't know. But let's just worry about tonight. So it was a great period. And look, parties, I think there'd be regret on both sides about how that was handled, and but it certainly wasn't a smart time and messaging from our organisation as a whole, and it certainly made it look like that there was a rift between NZR and the All Blacks, and I don't think the rift was, I just think there was some bad decisions made.
But the trust was gone, and you had a coffee the next morning with Robbo, and he accused you of leaking to the media. You're like, why the hell would I be leaking to the media? But you sort of say in the book that you think he just had nothing else to say because it kind of just, the plan had sort of gone out the window. And then at the same time, you've got Razor here in New Zealand sort of making comments about, he opened a press conference saying bulla because he'd been linked to sort of a Fiji head coaching role. This invited questions about whether he knew what was happening with the All Blacks, and he said that he knew an announcement would be forthcoming shortly. And so you're like, well, at this point, Razor appears to know more about my job than I do.
Yeah, well, that part actually came later.
We've skipped ahead in the timeline, haven't we, into 2023?
A little bit, but it's look, clearly there was a lot of work going on behind the scenes for a Plan B, and clearly I think Plan B was Plan A in a lot of people's minds, and there was a lot of communication along those lines. So. And that didn't help the situation because all it did is just keep the pressure on me, really. But you got to choose. You do get a choice about how you deal with pressure, and just because other people are piling it on you doesn't mean you have to absorb it. It's there, but I keep coming back, and it may sound boring, but the way that I got through it was by making sure that the group that I was supposed to be leading wanted to be led by me. And as long as those conversations were clear, then the other stuff, whilst it hurt and it put me under massive pressure personally, and clearly there were conversations with other people going on behind the scenes, and I didn't like a lot of that because I didn't think that was right. But if you want to fight every battle and get upset by every little bit of bad messaging or bad behaviour or media pressure, then you're just going to get cynical and grumpy, and that wasn't me leading the All Blacks the way I felt I should. So I just stuck to my formula, and easy to say now, it wasn't easy at the time, but just trusted the players, trusted the management team. Was listening to the feedback, knew we had to make some changes, so I'd made some pretty significant changes, and now I felt like we just needed time to embed those changes in, and it's just a matter of how much patience. A lot of the country had run out of patience, and a lot of NZR had probably run out of patience, and so everyone kind of was looking for, how long do you give people?
And NZR make the decision to advertise the role in a World Cup year. That was unusual, right?
Yep.
Like, and you'd been involved in
first time.
Yeah, the two World Cups prior, which had never happened. 2011, it didn't happen.
Yep.
And you make at some point it clear that you are not going to reapply.
Yeah. Well, the process was we went through the rest of 2022 and I think, we won the rugby championship, won the Blair. We did really well. We had a bad 10 minutes against England where we cost us a draw in the last test of the year, but we didn't lose a test after, so we finished the year, I think, in quite a strong position. And then for me, what was right for the team was that the team just went through a normal year going into a World Cup. And that's really what I wanted. And I felt with everything from 2020, 21, 22, we'd finally got back to a point that we're now really believing in what we're doing. We had a good group in place that there was a high trust factor within the group. And right then I just felt it was the right time for everyone to get aligned and to go into a World Cup year with no external noise. And so I got asked at the end of 22 what I thought about the process of going early. I said, well, here's the reasons why I didn't think it was the right thing for the team. And early the following year in 23, it was 2 months later, I got asked again. I said, well, here's the same reasons. Try to convince me of why you think it is good for the All Blacks to do this. And basically, the messaging didn't convince me at all. And I felt that for us as a group, we just wanted solidarity to go through. And it wasn't, believe it or not, about whether I was going to be the next All Black coach, because I knew I was always going to get judged on a World Cup. And even then, you could go and win a World Cup and they still may have decided it was time for a change, and that's cool. That's their choice, and that's their job to do that. I just felt making that decision early clearly was designed to move me on, and sadly for me, it actually meant that I think about 14 of my management team got moved on, and this was in April. So I'm spending 6 months before a World Cup trying to deal with a management team that I want to go fired up to a World Cup, and now they've been told they're probably going to lose their job or will lose their job. And so I didn't think that was the right thing for us.
And you speak up about it publicly. You go on Hosking and Herald and TVNZ about exactly this, why it's a bad idea, because New Zealand Rugby have been, massaging the communication of this whole situation. You haven't really spoke out at this point, and then you're like, right, I'm going to say my bit. Against their wishes, they don't want you to do it. I'm wondering what your relationship looked like with Robbo at this point.
I don't want it to appear like there's nothing personal, there's no animosity here, but people just had different agendas. And so clearly, but they clearly didn't want to talk about the issue with me. They'd given me I'd given them my view. They didn't like it. I wanted to have a chance to talk again, so I expressed it again to them. But again, they didn't really want to really sell me the reasons why it was. I didn't think it was a great high performance strategy. They told me it was the way the world was moving, and I said, well, give me some evidence of that, and I didn't see that. But it was just the feeding of the narrative through the media of what was happening. It was almost like it was a done deal, and I felt like, well, the New Zealand public haven't even heard what the current All Black coach thinks about it. So, and it doesn't mean that I'm trying to convince people, but I felt that, I want to say what I need to say in the media. So that's why I did that. And I just had 24 hours. I had 2 or 3 interviews. I didn't involve my own media people because I didn't want to get them into trouble. And I knew that it was going to be provocative. But to me, my management team and needed to hear that I was supporting them. That my management team, who I want to go to war with in a World Cup, needed to see that I was fighting for their position. And if I remained passive through that whole thing, then they would always sort of think, well, why didn't you fight for us? And so I did what I did and got smacked for it, but it's I'd do it again.
I want to read you. I want to bring in Aaron Smith again and Gilbert and Oka now and just read you some stuff. Aaron said he was above it And all I could think was how. Was he able to be the bigger person every time through his actions, through his communication? He didn't turn it into a circus of he said, they said. He just did his job. How did he get up each day and come to work? That's the power he created every time he was knocked down. That's how he carried himself, and it gave us confidence. We looked at him and saw he wasn't going to crumble, even under the adverse circumstances of them already having named who was going to replace him as coach. What a joke. And to still be above it, crazy. That is inspiring. And I want to read what Gilbert says. I think this might be the most powerful passage in the book. He writes, "It was shambolic, really. Ian did a fantastic job of shielding the group from the tensions that were emerging from the mothership. Robbo had made it quite clear that he backed Razor. That's who he wanted. It was a matter of time, and whenever he could, he put the boot into us. The group never felt supported at all from the CEO. It was challenging, and Foz was right at the cutting edge of it. He bore the brunt of a lot of it. That is why in my 23 years, Foz would be the toughest of all the coaches I've worked with. I've had Smithy, Mitchell, Ted, Steve, and then Foz. And what he had to deal with was unbelievably tough, because when you lose the support of people who are inside your waka, inside your tent, it destabilizes it like nothing else. People that were really hurt is the family, his wife, children, parents. And those sorts of actions cause devastating blows to those people."
I haven't heard that for a while. Yeah, well, I guess I don't know what you want me to say to that, but it's he's a man I love and respect, but he's you can see why in the book I wanted some of those people to write, but you can also hopefully now understand my motivation for speaking out at that period about some decisions that were made that didn't make me popular with my own employees, but that was the quality of people that I was representing. And you can't coach the All Blacks by yourself. You need that group. And I needed them to know that just like they were disappointed that they didn't feel that other people had my back, they needed to know that I had their back. And you know, as an All Black head coach, you've got to make some horrible decisions. You've got to affect people's lives with your conversations with them. But the flip side of it is that what they expect in return is you to be judged on the same standard that you judge them. And so I needed to stand up for that group, and that's what I did.
Within that group, this is all playing out in the public.
Yeah.
But are there conversations behind closed doors when you're in camp and when you're interacting with the players about how farcical the situation is?
Yep. Look, there are, but I remember having a management meeting and also a leadership meeting, and I could sense the frustration and anger within the group. And this is early in the World Cup year, and basically when everything happened and they went through a coach appointment thing, and clearly when they announced the thing publicly that they were going to have a new process, I went in straight away within 2 hours and said, well, I wasn't going to stand because I just didn't want any noise around that anymore, you know? Like it was like, okay, well, I know what they're doing, and so I might as well so I didn't want weeks of speculation and to become a fight. And I listened to the frustration of the team at the time and the management at the time, because they then had to go through all their employment situations, which some of it wasn't that good. And basically for me, I said to them, April, I'm going to support you and do whatever I can for you. But on the 1st of May, and I drew a little circle around my calendar, 1st of May, we're moving on. And so it's only about the World Cup. And so I said, because ultimately we've got a job to do and we've got to go and try and win this World Cup. And so the whole thing became that. And I set aside 2 rules that helped me. And one rule was I said to them, I'm not going to spend any time with anyone who saps energy out of me, because I felt like this whole process had just sapped a lot of juice out of me. And I said, so I just got to put everything I've got into this. So if people want to talk to me about all sorts of other things, I'm just going to go to one side, because it had to be about the World Cup. And And the second thing I said to them is I'm not going to talk to any other organisation about a job for me after the World Cup until after the World Cup, simply because I didn't want the team to read about me talking about, after everything we'd been through. I just felt the right thing was that they just knew I was all in, and I was all in. And so we had to move the group. It was 1st of May.
What's your relationship with Razor like through this period when he's been named and he's going to be taking over? Are you guys chatting regularly or at all?
No, not really. I mean, he had his own plans, and so when I got back because I was overseas when they announced it, we're looking at some Six Nations stuff and phoned him up and congratulated him. But, there was some tension there with the process. There's no doubt about that. But really after that, it was, I went into factual mode after that, and it really became about the World Cup. And the main thing for me after that happened was really working. I just got New Zealand to tell me, okay, how do you think it's going to operate? Having 2 All Black head coaches, how are you going to, what's it going to be like having different, my own management team who I'm trying to get ready for a World Cup, talking to another coach about whether they got a job. There's a whole lot of little logistical things that I don't think had been well thought through. So I got a formal structure about how that was going to play out, and got everyone to agree to that, so that at least there were some rules around it or structure about it.
Is there any knowledge sharing, when he takes over from you? Like, is there any use in passing down stuff you've known, or is it just he's got his own way of doing things and you leave him to it?
Well, that's their choice, isn't it? And so, but basically, most of our group got moved out, and so that probably gives you the answer.
Mm. I want to just take a slight detour into media before we link back up to the World Cup. We will let you go eventually. This is really good, though. I thought it was really interesting at the start of the book. You mentioned Gregor, who is one of New Zealand, if not New Zealand's best rugby writer. And he was, when times were bad and the results weren't going your way, he was vocal that you should be moved on, that it was right for change. And then he changed his opinion over time as things got better, and you kind of respected that, and then he's written your book. And I guess the question is,
did you respect that?
Yeah.
Are there members of the media whose opinions you care about more than others, and how much do you read, and was it a difficult choice getting him to write your book?
Yes, I mean, in terms of the media, in terms of opinion pieces, there's you have to read a bit because you have to understand the pressure that's coming in on the team. So I don't sit there reading everything, but I have people around who tell me I need to read this or I need to read that, or I'll see some things. So you clearly do see all that, or most of it, and you form. And you start to understand how the media operates very, very clearly. It was my background anyway. You learn that, whilst it's the media, it's also a business. The media is a business. And so effectively you have, and in New Zealand, it's quite a small business, like you've got your NZME, you've got that side of the organisation, and then you've got the stuff, that side of the organisation. So if you go and do a one-on-one with that side of the organisation, you don't offer the same opportunity to the other one, well, they'll often write an article picking holes in whatever you said to the other one. So it's not as clear-cut as just coming out and saying this is exactly what I think. You've got to manage those scenarios pretty well. So, look, and I know that you're never after if you get 50% approval from the media in this job, well, you're pretty happy, So I get all that, but it's the people that write stuff that's that gets personal. That's when it starts to hurt a little bit, and it's when it starts. That the articles are really geared at you individually, and rather than about the game or whatever. And so, but that's all part of the game nowadays, and so. When it came to around that Irish period, I didn't read I read hardly any of the media at that point because it just doesn't do you any good. It's it didn't have to be an Einstein to know what they'd be saying, but you know, and Gregor probably disappointed me the most at that point because I felt that Gregor, to me, always had a way of looking at it a little bit more detached than just the emotion of winning and losing. But he came up to his conclusions about what should happen. I didn't like that. I sat down with 2 or 3 journalists at the end of 2022, at the end of that year, and talked to them about how can we actually project the All Blacks and get the country behind us for a World Cup, and put it on a couple of them. They said, well, you know, end of the day, I know you tried to get rid of me, but I'm here. And so surely we can put that to one side, and because we've got a job to do, which is to talk to the New Zealand public about where the All Blacks are at. And so you change as a head coach, your attitude changes to the media. But what I loved about Gregor and respected about Gregor was he was willing to keep assessing the team and its progress as time went on after that. And it's the opinion pieces that they say something once and therefore they feel they've got to keep backing that opinion for the next 5 years. So you find yourself getting judged as a coach on something you did 5 years ago. Now I respect that, but hey, well, maybe I've changed a bit. Maybe I've learnt from some of my mistakes and maybe we have grown. And I think he was willing to do that. So for me, I didn't want the book to be a PR thing. I wanted it to have that filter of someone who'd gone to the dark side and have that view have that lens on the book as well.
The story of the book, my takeaway is that on one side you've got New Zealand rugby and the media sort of forming this narrative. And on the other side, you've got what's actually happening inside the camp, and it's the players who are all so 100% behind you. And it feels a little bit like by the time you got to the World Cup final, at least the public had come around and you were linked up again, because we don't need to go through the whole World Cup campaign, but we can just land on the final doorstep. Yep. Like things had been going well, right? Do you feel like it had changed?
Yeah, look, I think so. And I think it was a unique World Cup, wasn't it? You know, like we got smacked at Twickenham before the World Cup, and that caused a lot of people to panic about our chances. But, you know, if you look at we had made a lot of changes there, got another red card and all that sort of stuff. But we're still getting ready for a World Cup. And ironically, the Twickenham game where we got smacked by South Africa, Scott Barrett got red carded, which turned out to be the wrong decision, by the way, and he got let off. But they got 4 of their 5 tries around the line-out mauls and stuff, and we actually weren't as good as we needed to be when we had a red card. And there's a lot of if you draw the line to the World Cup final, so we learned a lot from Twickenham, and I had to apply those lessons sadly in the World Cup final too. And so I think our preparation for the World Cup was really, really good. We had to play France in round 1, and wow, you know, what a great occasion. We lost, first pool game we've ever lost in history, but man, playing France in that stadium at that point was always going to be a massive ask. And so expectations, people were worried, weren't they, about the World Cup? Ironically, in 2015 when we won, we played pretty poorly in the pool stages too, and we had public saying, what the heck are they doing? We're not coming right. But it was all about the quarterfinal for us. And our whole preparation was for the Irish test. And you know, that's probably one of the great tests in many ways. But what I think happened there is that our country went from being anxious and worried about the team, and then suddenly we beat Ireland, and then there was this great celebration, and suddenly people started to really believe and be hopeful. And we had an amazing amount of support after that game, or before that game, but afterwards it's like, this is awesome. You know, we're right where we need to be.
You lose by 1 point, like how close you came. What does it look like? You're obviously moving on, and so a huge part of the staff and the players. Like, how do you end that? Do you get together? Is it emotional? Do you sort of split the next day? What does it look like?
Yeah, well, you know, World Cups are like that. You go from being family working and living together, then suddenly the next day you leave and everyone starts their next journey. And so Sunday, we were together. We said some goodbyes as a group to the people that we knew were leaving, and obviously that involved nearly all the management team, and it's really emotional, hearing players talk about management and about their contribution to their careers in the All Blacks is pretty special. And I think 660 came down and played a few songs, which was pretty cool in the shed. So very special times. And that's the professional sport. You don't get long to say goodbye, and then you go. And players are off on their breaks or new clubs or new opportunity, and I had to hop on a plane and go home, and then it was over.
We're recording this this morning. News broke that Mark Robinson is standing down as New Zealand Rugby CEO end of the year, maybe a couple of months.
Yep, end of the year.
What was your relationship like with him afterwards and still, and how do you look back on your relationship?
Look, he had a job to do. He was new in it, and I had a job to do. There was lots of pressure on him, I guess, with COVID and the financial side of the game particularly, and the private equity thing and all that. So there's a whole lot of things that New Zealand Rugby as a collective had to deal with, and it was never going to be an easy time. And so, and I guess ultimately him and a board made decisions around a whole lot of things, and our job was to make sure that we looked after the All Blacks, to make sure that we felt that the All Blacks had what we needed to do to perform at that top level. And so, there were some clashes there. There were there's decisions made that I didn't like. And part of that's life, isn't it? You can't get everything you want. And so we would have disagreed on a few things. As a person, no issues. But from a decision-making thing, I think it was a very tough time for New Zealand Rugby.
I'm just going to wrap this part of it up with a word from Beauden Barrett. He said, over time, Foz won so much respect for how he conducted himself and the dignity he showed under intense pressure. If we had won the World Cup, it would have been an incredible story, but I think it still was. What won't be forgotten is how his character was tested and how he never broke and how he handled himself. Not many people would be able to go through what he did. For the listener, I can't urge you enough to read the book. Like, it's full of these greats of the game, and it's all the shared messages. But I just want to, before we do let you go, just talk on a few sort of coaching points. Like, I'd sort of read and heard that you saw yourself as more of a collaborator than a coach, but perhaps evolved and changed over time. You started as an attack coach, and then there's 16 of you, right, in the All Blacks environment. So it's kind of like you're managing the coaches. But can you tell us a little bit about how your role changed over time?
Look, coaching means you've got to change your style. You can't have a style, I don't think. And so, because like I said earlier, the coaching, your style depends on the people that you're coaching. And so our goal is to try to influence them and help them grow. And so, for example, how you coach in 2012 when you pick a young skinny-legged 10, 15 from Taranaki, Beauden Barrett, and you bring him into the All Blacks, how you coach him is immensely different to how you coach Beauden Barrett in 2023. Because by then, Bodie's smart, tactical, he's got such an awesome grasp of the game. So you have to change your style. And so it's a matter of growing with your players. And so, I probably went from being someone who'd sit down with the players and probably be a little bit more technical at the start to, with some of the older players at the end, you're actually working with them on, okay, what do you see in this picture, and how can we best get the best out of you in this scenario? So, because often they've got the answers and you're just trying to help them through that process. So, and so that's the key. So yes, the style changes, but it has to change because you're coaching people who are changing. And like Bodie's words are immensely humbling to me because out of every, I had a lot to do with him. He was in the backs and in the year that I coached, and just a magnificent person, and his heart is just 100% in the All Blacks, and he will do whatever he can for that team to play well. And ironically, I remember in the Sunday before we left France, there was a bit of a haka going on for a few of us at leave, and I remember I was looking at him, and there's actually a few tears in our eyes. I think there goes that word again, but you got to keep adapting as a coach, and now I've got to learn how to adapt in the Japanese market.
Is it the same as a father as well? Michaela talked really fondly about daddy-daughter wisdom when they were kids being dropped off at school. Now all three of your kids are adults forging their own way in the world, but are you still dropping those little pieces of wisdom to the kids in your own way?
Yeah,
is it done in a coaching style or a parenting style?
Is there a difference?
I don't know. You tell me.
I don't know that there is. I'm not that smart, I tell you. But I used to love taking my kids to school. So I have Mark and Jamie and Michaela in school, and once that door's locked and you're driving, you've got them. They can't escape. and so I used to call it daddy wisdom time, that I'd give them advice.
No, she must have put the daughter on there to isolate Mark again.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on. A lot of pressure, anyway, I won't get that. I'm already in enough trouble with that with my kids. But no, it's you're just trying to find the right thing to say at the right time, and often the best thing to say sometimes is nothing, and just to create space for them to actually express their own mind, and but that's the art of coaching, isn't it? Get it wrong sometimes, hopefully get it right a few more times.
Michaela plays for the Football Ferns. What's it like being a high-performance coach and then watching your daughter playing in the sport you've got, just as a pure spectator?
Oh, awesome. I love it. And because I just, you understand the pressures they're under and how they go about it. And I think as a dad, you're just immensely proud when your kids find something in life that they really want to get stuck to. I get the same satisfaction out of looking at Jamie, our youngest, and she's a primary school teacher, and she was searching for what was right for her, and then she decided to go teaching, and she just loves teaching, and seeing her energy. And I got my son, who's got his own building company, Top Shelf Builders, and they seen him go from someone who didn't like school, and then then the creativity of him building and making things and going about that. So you have immense pride as a dad, as a mum and dad, when you see your kids find their little niche and express it. And the fact that one of them's in sport is that's just was her gift. That's what she's been blessed with, and she does a great job. But it's cool sitting down and sharing the experiences with her about what she finds hard and stuff like that. And she doesn't get a lot of advice from me. I think the old daddy wisdom thing's gone now. I've lost that little mantle, but every so often she'll just come and share a couple of little things about getting a view. Makes you feel special.
You're sharpening the tools for granddad wisdom, won't you?
Yeah, I've got two of those.
Yeah.
And it's coming. They need to get ready for it.
And can you just share some of the importance of your wife Lee in all of this? Like, we've covered your whole life story, and she's been the rock alongside you for so much of it. Like, what is she to you?
Yep, she's just part of me, really. It's it's really Ian and Lee. It always has been. I think she's it's not easy. I guess when your husband's in the limelight and seeing the pressures that go on, but she just sees joy and beauty in moments that I don't always see, and having someone that can bring those moments out. But the flip side of it, she's very pragmatic about it, because she knows it. The minute I start feeling sorry for myself or sulking or saying woe is me, then she's the first person to listen, and then to tell me oh well, this is what you wanted, so just get on with it. And She annoys me when she'll generally always look at the other person's view when I'm sort of not happy with someone, and she'll always throw that other view. And I said, well, I don't want to hear that right now, but
not helpful.
But generally, it is very helpful, unfortunately.
Long term, back in international rugby, happy with club rugby?
No, I wouldn't say never. I think that hopefully you've gauged through this and probably through the book that I couldn't coach against some of those players. You know, we've walked through such a journey that to me, I resisted any international opportunities after the World Cup, and that's why I went club. Loving my time in Toyota and loving the people there, and committed there committed there for another 2 years, and after that we'll assess things and see what happens. But I still talk regularly to Joe Smith, and I just sort of you keep reliving what it's like at the international level, and parts of me I still miss it, but I'm at peace with the journey that I've had. We'll wait and see. I don't worry too much about the future.
It's been a hell of a journey. Like, this has been such a cool chat. Sometimes when books come out, they underdeliver. Like, you have a hell of a story to tell, and they underdeliver. This one certainly over-delivers. I was so engaged with the whole thing. Like, it's so good to the listener. Cool. Go and get it. It's brilliant. And then we're just scratching the surface in this conversation. Well, this has been a couple of hours, but there's so much goodness in there. So can't recommend it highly enough. But thank you for just joining us. This has been I've got so much out of it. So
thanks, Steve. Yeah,
really appreciate you taking the time. Is there anything from you, Shay?
No, likewise. It's been a really interesting insight into an area which I think as a public we probably think we know so much about. But the reality is, when you get the inside story and your perspective, very, very different to what we see in here, and hopefully a little bit more kind of understanding about the pressures and the environment that some of our top athletes and some of our top support staff operate in as well.
Thanks, mate, and I'll forgive you for your 3 interruptions.
You're welcome. I don't know why I just thank you for you're welcome. Flustered.
But I've actually enjoyed the experience, sad to say. So
very good.
That's good to
Thanks
hear.
very much for it.
Yeah.
Part 2.
Yeah.
We'll wait and see.
Cheers, Ian.